Hello, in this video I'm going to continue to look at the relationship between Shiloh and Onision, the YouTuber who calls himself Onision. So I'm going to continue to look through her tweets and analyse their relationship. So if you haven't seen the other parts yet, have a look at them. I'm going to put in the comments section, I'm going to put the different parts up so that you can click on them and see them in the right order. This was the first breakup. One nurse came to take my information down and I told her everything. She allowed me to call my mother and removed me from care and to the main office to wait. I was picked up by family hours later. This is off topic, but I wish I could thank her for giving me a voice that day. She's now allowed to call her mother. So everything she went through that day, all of the hysterical tears and the state that she got into happened after Onision wouldn't let her call her mother. He was calling the police about her and he wouldn't let her call her mother. And so that was why she then threatened to kill herself. It sounds like she was just absolutely desperate to be heard. And she wasn't being heard, and so that's why she took such desperate measures as to threaten suicide. And after she did that, for him, that just helped him to try to prove to people that she was crazy and it had nothing to do with him, because he didn't give them the reason. He knew all along that if he would allow her to call her mother, she would begin to calm down, because the reason she was in such a state was because he wouldn't. But he didn't tell anyone that. So he gave people the impression that she was just going crazy. And threatening suicide because someone won't listen to you sounds really extreme, doesn't it? It sounds a bit mad. But when you put it into the context of this relationship and of the way that he, when you think about how he never listened to her, he ignored her boundaries every time. That's what happens to someone. They start to do anything they can to try to be heard. So she's been taken away by the police, she's been locked in a room that she can't get out of, then she's been transferred to a mental health facility. So all of these people are believing her boyfriend's version of who she is. And so that's really powerful. That's how much power he has over her now. This is a smear campaign. He's managed to manipulate these different authorities into believing that there's just something really wrong with her and she needs to be put away. And luckily, this nurse actually listens to her story. This is the first time she's finally been heard throughout this whole experience. And she also says, you filmed the breakdown that followed. So she had no right to express herself in privacy. All that she was going through was being shown to his millions of subscribers. In the same way that he had access to all of her passwords, and so he could control what she was telling other people, he was stopping her from speaking to her family, or at least making it really difficult for her to do that. He was also deciding what he wanted to broadcast of her, and there was nothing she could do to control that. So while she's experiencing this really traumatic event, it's being broadcast to everyone through his lens, not only literally, but also because he will paint himself in the light of being the calm, sane one, when in fact he's somebody who is so unstable himself that he feels no empathy. And that's what comes across to me in the video of her being abused in this situation, that she is shouting and crying and being really emotional, and his very calm voice is actually really creepy, because it shows that he has absolutely no empathy for her. But what he wants to show people is that he's really sane and he's got this crazy girlfriend. He's been really patient with her so far, but he has no choice now. He's going to have to get the police to deal with this. It's a really good example of a smear campaign, because it just has such an impact on the people who listen to what the narcissist says. And you can see how powerless this girl is to what's being decided about her by these different authorities who are believing in this version of her that's painted by Onision. September 2011, you lured me back in, you flew me to LA, and a few days in took me to pick out my own engagement ring. We filmed the video announcing my return that night. So for all this time, she has been trying to be heard and understood, and she has been going crazy because there are these two people that she's trying to relate to. There's the person who seemed to care about her and think she was amazing, the person he left, who left his wife for her because she was that special to him. And then there's the person who degrades her, humiliates her, and has contempt for her, and isn't interested in how she feels or what she has to say. And so all this time she's been hoping that if he can just hear her and see that actually she hasn't become a worthless person, he's just misunderstood all these different situations, and he's the one that's been persecuting her. If he can just understand that, then the kind, loving person is going to return and realise how special she is after all. So she's not aware of the fact that that person never existed. He uses that mask to lure her in each time after they argue, and then his true colours emerge again. And the reason he's doing that is because that keeps her there, that hope that actually the real him is the kind him. And also it means that he gets more narcissistic supply, because every time she trusts him again, she's going to get a big shock when the abuse happens again. So he's going to see a big emotional reaction in her, and he's going to be able to feed off that energy that she's supplying him with. So now it seems that her dreams have come true, that finally he's listening to her and he's realising he's made this terrible mistake, that actually she is this really worthy, special person to him, and he really wants her, respects her, needs her in his life. And so he wants to commit to her, and she can pick out whatever ring she wants. So it just seems like so tempting. You can see why she was drawn back in again, because she didn't see who he really is. She saw all of the abuse as him misunderstanding her and not seeing her for who she is. So he's been acting like that because he hasn't understood her value. And that's what keeps so many people in these relationships. They hold on to this belief that deep down this person does think that they really matter, but there's just been all these misunderstandings. And if this person can just hear them out, they'll realise that they've been in the wrong. They've completely misconstrued all these different situations. What they don't see is that a narcissist has to be a perpetrator to a victim. That's what they survive off. So they have to have that energy of somebody reacting emotionally towards them. So they will continue to create situations that cause somebody to react to them. So there's no misunderstanding. And even if they aren't honest with themselves, and if they really think that they're in the right, they're just going to hold on to that, because they don't want to see themselves for who they really are. They want to see themselves as a victim and in the right. And when you think a narcissist doesn't understand you, and you try everything to get them to understand, what you're doing is giving them narcissistic supply again, because you're spending energy on them. And that gives them, they feed off that gives them energy, and it makes them feel important because they've taken over your head. So the more you try to persuade them to understand you, the more important they feel. And they might look like or act like that annoys them and they don't want to hear about it, but actually it's boosting their ego. And it's interesting how she said we filmed the video of my return that night, because it really is like, this isn't a real world. It's a bit like the Truman Show. Everything is recorded. And she said that in an interview, how everything she did was recorded, that he was just constantly filming her. So it was like there was no real life, I guess. I imagine it would have felt like, because there's no privacy and everything's on show, what's real? Where does reality begin? And with a narcissist, there isn't a lot of reality, because they're constantly shielding themselves and everyone else from reality and from who they really are. Then she continues, "Just so you know, I never loved you. I was a victim of your manipulation, and the thought of you not only never crosses my mind, but it never affects my life, day, mood. You're powerless, and you have been powerless for years. How does it feel?" I think it's true that she never loved him and that she was manipulated by him, and the person that she loved was someone who didn't exist. He was the person that Onision would pretend to be during the love bombing. And it looks like he does have affection for her in some of the videos. I think he would have had a similar kind of affection for her as a child would have for a toy. It entertains him and amuses him or her, and then they'll put it back in the toy box after they get bored of it and take it out again next time they feel like playing with it. But what she says about how he doesn't affect her anymore isn't true. She's spoken in an interview about how she still feels traumatised from events that happened back then. She'll still have moments, even though she's now had a child with someone else and is with somebody else, she'll still have moments where that trauma returns to her. So, and even the fact that she's saying to him he's powerless shows that she's still under his power, because she's trying to get her own back, to get revenge on him. After a very short time living with, she says CYR, I'm not sure who that is, in LA, we drove back to Tacoma in your Prius. When we arrived, the fridge was full of rotten food again from when you fled the scene after calling the police on me. Again, you filmed the results. So he made this massive fuss about getting her out of his house to the police, and how she wouldn't leave the house. And yet it looks like he actually wanted to leave anyway. He made this big fuss about how he was going to have to sacrifice himself and pay the bills with her living there, because she had nothing, she had no earnings anymore, because all she was doing was working for him all the time, helping him with his YouTube videos. So she couldn't, there was nowhere for her to go at that time. And he was complaining about how he was going to have to pay all the bills, but he was just going to kindly do that as he had no choice, and maybe people were going to come and vandal the house, and he was making himself out to be this martyr and a real victim of her madness. And yet, after all of that, he wasn't even interested in being in the house anyway. So all of that was just for show, to show his audience on YouTube and the police that he was this victim of this crazy woman. And when she reacted to this, she probably felt betrayed by it and really surprised. He filmed her reaction. So again, she is on show, and he is making the most out of her reaction. Not only is he getting supply from it at that time, but he's using it to show her again having this big emotional reaction, so he can show his audience if he wants to. It's like he's treating her as if she's a TV channel. Whenever she has a reaction, he literally tunes in. You know, it's like he's just sitting there enjoying being entertained by it and recording it for his own pleasure. Do you remember turning over to me while watching a cut scene in Mortal Kombat and confessing how you masturbated to the idea of one of the characters? I mean, look at her. Could you imagine what she'd do to me? I think this says quite a lot about him as well, that he is turned on by this. So he's turned on by teenagers. That, you know, there's lots of teenagers who've come forward and said that he was grooming them. So if this is true, then he's turned on by them. And he was apparently masturbating to porn of teenagers. So he's turned on by being the one with the power, but he also seems to be turned on by being completely powerless and having this frightening, ferocious looking woman have power over him. And that's quite interesting, because that suggests to me that there's this little boy inside him that wants to be told off and punished. And that would fit with any abuse that he has experienced himself. He talked about his father as being a paedophile. So if that's true, who knows what he experienced when he was a child, whether that would have been sexual abuse, or if it wasn't, the kind of person who is a paedophile and acts on that is going to be somebody who doesn't have empathy for children. And so, you know, because they're ignoring a child's boundaries. So he may well have experienced some form of abuse, even if it was emotional only, from his father when he was a child. And I don't know anything about his mother, but I do think that says something. Somebody who gets turned on by a really frightening character, that says something about what they have experienced in their lives. Sexual encounters were always aggressive. Keep in mind, I was only 18. You liked to call me a bitch or a slut or whore during. So it seems to me that he's replaying something from his past, some kind of trauma that he needs to replay. People who have been traumatized often are attracted to traumatic events, you know, to watching traumatic scenes on TV, for instance, or playing games that are brutal, because the brain has a way of trying to fix itself by returning to a situation that needs to be healed. So people, you know, of course it doesn't tend to work. It just makes somebody more traumatized. But it's a way of trying to return to an old feeling in order to fix it. I got UTI infections frequently, so presumably that's because of the force of the sex, because it was because it was a violent kind of sex. You used to pull my hair back so hard my windpipe would be compressed to the point I couldn't make noise. So that's really extreme. It doesn't sound at all pleasant for her. It sounds like a sort of rape fantasy for him. This was my first sexual relationship. Oh, that was so depressing. This was my first sexual relationship. I became conditioned to think this was normal for my age. This was her first experience of sex. So she was a virgin before this. And here she is in this hotel room with this guy who, the first thing he says is he can't wait to get her pregnant. You can just imagine how overwhelming that is. And just what a creepy situation. But the first time she ever does it is with a guy who, within 5 minutes of coming into the room, is already having sex with her. It doesn't sound like a safe, loving experience at all. I remember one night sleeping on the floor while Greg edited a video. I was nudging his hand with my head to get his attention for a long time while he ignored me. After a while he leaned down and said, "I love how you love me. It's so pure, like a puppy. Aww." So I think that confirms what I was saying about how he sees her as a pet. He's ignored her for all of that time. And then he finally acknowledges her and speaks to her like she's not even a person. So, and it's all about the love that she gives him, how pure it is. It's not about his feelings towards her. He just loves what he gets from her. While he's working, he's got this constant attention coming from her, and he can ignore her and it will carry on. She'll continue to nudge him. So he can rely on her constant validation of him while he just gets on with his life. So again, there's that energy imbalance that she's giving energy more and more, and he's just getting on with his work. He's giving her nothing. And then when he finally acknowledges her, he speaks to her with contempt, like she's just an animal, and putting her down, saying how pure her love is, as if it's a sort of naive, innocent love, which of course in reality it actually is, because she can't see who this person is that she's feeling this love for. But that's because, of course, of him. He's presenting this complete fake image every time he treats her kindly. I'm going to end the video here because it gets increasingly disturbing, and I don't want people to get triggered. And I wouldn't really advise binge watching this series, one after the other, or at least if you do, I think it might be good to have a break if you have ever experienced anything like this, because otherwise you might get re-traumatized. The next video is quite a short one, but it's again just, it's even more horrific than this one. So I'm going to leave it, and I'll carry on in the next video. I'll put it out in less than a week this time. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.